How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. I have been building a Wild Western town with all the standard Wild Western buildings, like a mech depot, a saloon with a refinery on the roof, a church, a Pinkerton's headquarters with a balloon on the roof, a bank, and a sheriff's office with an overly sized jail cell for monsters and things. It's been a little while since I made a new building for this town, so I decided this week it was time for building number 7. Like usual, I started with a wooden base. I went to glue these two pieces together and I couldn't get my wood glue to squeeze out of the bottle. I looked for whatever could be stopping the glue, and I found a small blockage. After that little procedure, the glue flowed like water and I was able to glue and clamp the pieces of wood and set them aside to dry. Next, I got out a sheet of paperless foam core, cut it to the size of the wooden base using my hobby knife. I wasn't entirely sure where I was going with this build at this point, so I drew a highly detailed piece of concept art to help with my vision. And by highly detailed, I mean not very detailed, but using that rough sketch as a reference did help give me some idea of where to go next. I started slicing up some balsa and I traced out the walls of the building. The front-facing wall has a false front on the right-hand side and a barn-style roof on the left. The back wall was cut to match the angle of the roof with no false front. I then used this dental tool to carve some panel lines onto the wood. It has a tiny little ball on one end which makes some excellent seams. After that, I used a wire brush to scratch up the wood and bring out the grain. This gives it a much more weathered look. I always love when a nice texture appears on the wood. I also went back with that dental tool and I added some vertical lines to help break up the horizontal panels into different planks. Next, I used this 1:72 scale guy as a reference for the doors and the windows to make sure they were all the right size. After those were drawn out, I cut them out with my X-Acto knife. I know it didn't look like it, but I did use an X-Acto knife. Next, I cut up some thinner strips of balsa wood and began framing out the window, the doors, and breaking up large, flat sections on the exterior walls of the building with some decorative trim. After all of the walls were done, I glued them all together. I also added some beams to span from the front to the back and give extra support for the roof. I also added some trim pieces to all of the corners of the building, and then it was time to move on to the doors. I cut up a styrene sheet with the diamond pattern on it to be the main body of the doors. I cut that into 2 smaller pieces and I glued it to the inside of the building. I went to the outside of the building and I added some smaller details. Then it was time to start working on the roof. I cut up a piece of styrene to match the width of the roof, and then I cut that into 4 roof sections. I glued those in place with a little spacer of balsa wood between each one. After that, it was time to add some corrugated metal to the roof. I used a sheet of miniature corrugated metal, and I snipped it into lots of little pieces and began gluing them to the roof. The super glue likes to spread out and run off of the metal, so if you use this method, be prepared to get your hands full of super glue, like build making stuff. I added a cap to the ridge and a little topper for the false front, and the building was looking fit for a normal Wild West. And then it was time to make it fit for an abnormal Wild West. At this point, the wood glue had dried, so it was time to glue the foam to the wood and the building to the foam. After that, I broke out my bits boxes. I also grabbed some receipt paper rolls, and here's my collection of styrene tubes and rods. I cut 2 of the receipt paper rolls at an angle that matched the pitch of the roof. I used some coffee bag tin ties as a collar to go around the top of the pipe. I also cut up some styrene discs to clean up the gap at the top. I glued the pipes down to some other plastic discs that I found. I glued those to the roof. I also added some wire mesh that I trimmed to the size and shape of the top of the smokestacks. Next, I built a little balcony or rooftop platform using some styrene beams that I cut at a 45-degree angle and glued together with plastic weld. I added some styrene trusses, a wire mesh, and some angled supports on one side of the platform, and it was ready to go on the roof. I added some tank parts to the roof as greeblies. I also made a little access panel box on the side of one of the smokestacks. For the door of the panel box, I used a piece that I stole from another tank model. I had the styrene ladder that wouldn't work at this scale as a ladder, but you know what it would work as? A railing. I was going to make an Among Us joke because of these vents, but decided not to. And I knew that people needed a way to get up onto the roof, so I made a bulkhead to hide the stairs or ladder that would give people access to the roof. I also put corrugated metal on that little section, and I made another door using that same tank. I added a bunch of other junk to the platform to suggest that it was lazily used for storage over the years. I also added an electrical panel to the side of the building. Two of the final details I added to the building were some antennas made from scraps of tiny metal tubes that I found at the hobby store. I drilled some holes and I glued those antennas in place. And it was time to tidy up the workstation and get it ready for the painting. I then took this thing outside and I applied a zenithal highlight, first with a coat of gray, then a spray of white directly from above. I decided to paint this one primarily with the airbrush, and I had a lot of fun with it. I appreciated with the dark blue, applying it to all the dark areas that had been established by the zenithal highlight. I picked out some panels to make red, and then I base coated the roof with a more terracotta red. And then I went over all of the wood surfaces with a warm reddish brown. This building is some type of forge or ironworks or blacksmith that's seen a lot of soot, so I went with a more industrial feel and I painted a bluish black over all of the pipes and other metal elements. I did use a brush to apply more of the detail work, and then I stippled on a light gray on the exposed corners of the roof panels. After that, I gave the roof a coat of a rust wash and I dry brushed on some tan to tie it all together. I then painted the base with a Mod Podge and brown paint mixture, and while that was still wet, I stuck down some sand, and then I covered the whole thing with isopropyl alcohol and watered down white glue. Because this is a blacksmith, I wanted to make a sign that would reflect that. I glued some pieces of balsa wood together, and then I traced out and cut out the shape of an anvil. I then glued some little styrene rings to the top. I ran a little metal rod through it. I painted the whole thing with a charcoal black. And I drilled a hole in the side of the building and I glued the sign in place. The last thing to do was to paint the sides of the base with black 3.0, and I called it good. here is the town so far. I'm pretty happy with how it's shaping up. This is not the final layout. I probably have 3 or 4 more buildings to add before the town is complete. I will also have one final video, which will be all of the streets and the filler pieces that I will populate with people, mechs, and scatter terrain, and all the like. I will figure out a final layout with a proper display in that final video, so stay tuned for all of that. And with that, that is the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching. A special thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.